Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the GM. It's your guy, Boulanger. Up next on the GM, the Ravens are becoming a farm team. Let's talk about it. You see, I hope by now, from part one and the four players that we presented to you in that video, that you're seeing a theme happen with the Baltimore Ravens. Hopefully, you're being able to recognize that four proven players at positions we've consistently tried to fill have been allowed to walk out of the door for literally nothing. Okay. Granted, the Baltimore Ravens may have received some compensatory picks, but it's hard to identify what those picks actually turned into rather than assessing the value of the player we actually allowed to leave. You see, we're literally growing and developing players and feeding them to other teams to come back and compete against us. But just in case you were not convinced from part one, I have three more players to present to you, and I also have two bonus players who we actually traded away. So let's get into it. Let's start with tight end wide receiver Darren Waller. The Baltimore Ravens drafted Darren Waller in 2015 in the sixth round. Now, to be honest, I didn't even realize that Darren Waller was that old or was drafted that long ago. But Darren Waller was big and fast, kind of a wide receiver with a tight end body. And I guess in some aspects, he was kind of mispositioned because he eventually moved to tight end where he found a lot of success in the NFL. Nevertheless, he showed some flashes, showed a lot of ability, a lot of talent, but either the Baltimore Ravens didn't know how to use him or he had too many personal issues going on to really develop into what he needed to be. Nevertheless, the talent was there. We had already seen evidence that this guy could play ball. And so he played 2 seasons, and if I remember correctly, he did not play in the 2017 season. He returned to the NFL after um, doing some off-field and off-season uh, recovery and joined the Oakland Raiders, which then turned into the Las Vegas Raiders. And he never looked back. He never looked back and regretted his time in Baltimore nor leaving Baltimore because he stepped on the scene in Oakland. And in 2019, after finding his way, and in 2020 in a follow-up season, he caught 90 balls and then 107 balls, eclipsing 1,100 yards in both of those seasons. And as you're watching the highlights, you will see that when he played against the Baltimore Ravens, they didn't have an answer for him, catching 10 balls for over 100 yards. Now, I think the Ravens won that game, but yet and still, the question would be, could the Ravens have used 90 catches and 1,100 yards in that 2019 season, although it was super successful? Could the Ravens have used 107 catches and 1,100 yards in that 2020 season when we were struggling to figure out who was going to do what at the wide receiver position? I believe that they could. Yeah, I know that there was some controversy surrounding Darren Waller, but you know what? The Baltimore Ravens kind of mess with players who have some controversy. Look at Earl Thomas. We brought him in and paid him a high salary. Look at Marcus Peters. We traded for him and paid him a high salary. So I don't want to hear really that he had too much controversy because once he got it together, he was good to go. But in case you guys don't like Darren Waller, let me bring in Ben Powers. Ben Powers was a 2019 draft pick. I believe they drafted Ben Powers in the fourth round. And he only played one game or appeared in one game in 2019. But once he stepped on the field as a starter, Ben Powers never stepped out of the starting role, playing in all 16 games in 2020, playing in all the games in 2021, and then playing in all the games in 2022 before departing for Denver. And actually, excuse me, he missed 3 games, I believe it was, in 2021. Nevertheless, this is a guy who is healthy. This is a guy who was consistent. This is a guy who earned a nice contract from the Denver Broncos, where he went on to earn a Pro Bowl. You see, every guy that we've let walk out of the door for literally nothing has gone on to earn Pro Bowl accomplishments. Now, why do we consistently allow that kind of talent to walk out of the door? But let me speak to Ben Powers a little bit. You see, Ben Powers was a staple at left guard, right? And one of the most important positions along the offensive line for a franchise quarterback is going to be his interior line, where pressure can get to a quarterback quickly, right? So why have we chosen to allow the left guard position to be a revolving door? You see, since Ben Powers, we're getting ready to go into our second starter, which is a more of a question mark, right? It was Ben Powers, then it changed to John Simpson. Now it's changing to Voorhees. At least that's what we believe. You see, at some point, we got to be willing to retain talent. And I know you may be saying, well, Belanger, man, we didn't have the money. We're going to talk about that in part three. We're going to talk about the money in part three. So, six players walk out of the door. Six players were either already Pro Bowlers or became Pro Bowlers. But let's not stop with Ben Powers. Let's get to the last farm system guy, the guy on my list, and let's go with Geno Stone. Geno Stone, if I remember the information correctly, was a 2020 seventh round pick. This is a player that the Baltimore Ravens cut, put on a practice squad, cut again, right? Which means they had trouble seeing talent. That has to be the truth. You see, because once he finally once he finally started getting on the field and becoming a contributor in 2021 and 2022 and 2023, he literally never missed a game. Literally never missed a game. And after you already had Geno Stone in your rookie mini camp, and then in the next season, mini camps and off-season workouts and training camps and season, that would have been a 2021 season. You already could be able to recognize what he could do. And you still had him in 2022, but you still decided to go out and bring in a player at the same position who has not really shown up yet in Marcus Williams for the Baltimore Ravens. But you already had a young talent. You already saw a guy at that time, if I'm remembering his numbers correctly, he had already put in uh, 16 to 18 games and then showed up and performed well in 2022, and then could have been a fringe Pro Bowler in 2023, leading the Baltimore Ravens with 7 interceptions. But this is a young guy who is equally or more talented than the guy you overpaid. This is the guy you let walk to a division rival for what? A 12 or $13 million contract? We couldn't have afforded that. We couldn't have saw fit where we could retain Geno Stone. Makes no sense. So we continue to draft, develop, grow, and farm out players. There is something wrong with this picture when you think about the level of talent that we've allowed to walk out of the door. But hold tight. I got two bonus players who were not necessarily farmed out, but they were drafted, developed, and sent off to be productive for other teams. Okay, now let's take a look at our two bonus players. Let's start with Orlando Brown, a guy who was not allowed to walk away in free agency, but a guy who was traded away. Orlando Brown was drafted in the 2018 draft. I believe it was the third round. A mountain of a man, a guy who was believed to be a developmental player. But once Orlando Brown was able to get onto the field and show his power, his strength, and his ability to hold down both the right tackle and the left tackle side in replacement of Ronnie Stanley, he never really looked back. Orlando Brown has been in the league, I believe it is 6 years going into his seventh season, where he's already earned or Pro Bowls. Now, no matter what you believe or think about Orlando Brown as a left or a right tackle, he is a guy who has performed very well, a guy who went on to Kansas City after being traded and allowed them to have confidence in that left tackle position where he earns himself a Super Bowl. A guy who leaves Kansas City, I believe, after a couple of seasons, and now he is the left tackle for the Cincinnati Bengals. Again, another division rival. You see, the reason why he makes this list is not necessarily because he was farmed out. It was simply because he was Ravens born, grown, and developed, and he had already shown on field ability. Okay? See, he was already proven. And when the Baltimore Ravens traded him, it was at a time where they were already vulnerable along that offensive line. Let's remember back. Ronnie Stanley was injured in 2020, having season ending surgery. Okay? And going into the 2021 offseason, the Baltimore Ravens didn't know if Ronnie Stanley was going to be healthy, right? And then there is no way that Ronnie Stanley was healthy enough in that offseason for them to make a move trading Orlando Brown when he still had one more year on his rookie deal and not knowing the status of Ronnie Stanley. Well, how do we know what the status of Ronnie Stanley was? Because in 2021, Ronnie Stanley only played one game and having to go back into surgery, ending another season. You see, so Orlando Brown could have been and should have been a staple along this Baltimore Ravens offense, especially with question marks about Ronnie Stanley. And he has had question marks since the 2020 season. So you're looking at basically 20, 21, 22, and 23. You're looking at 4 seasons of a questionable Ronnie Stanley when you already had a guy in Orlando Brown in house. And so you were so draft pick thirsty that you moved him early after he has already proven himself. But let's not stop with Orlando Brown. Let's move to Marquise Hollywood Brown, who was a 2019 first round pick, kind of a pick to support the growth and development of franchise quarterback Lamar Jackson. Now, we understand that Marquise Brown wasn't 100% his first season, but believe it or not, he played in all 16 games. The next season, he played in 14 games. And his final season in a Ravens uniform, he played in 16 games. See, there had been some conversation without investigation. Why I say it that way is this. There had been some conversation that Marquise Brown couldn't stay healthy. And I believed it just based on the conversation. But when I start pulling numbers for this particular series, I found out that he had only missed 2 games in a Baltimore Ravens uniform. Now, the truth is, he may have not always been healthy, but that guy improved every single season. His rookie season, which would have been Lamar Jackson's MVP season, he had 48 catches for almost 600 yards. I think it was like 580 something. His second season, with less games, he had 65 plus catches with like 760 yards. His final season, he played in all 16 games with 91 receptions and over 1,000 yards, and he had six or plus touchdowns in every single season. But this is what we traded away and turned it into, I believe it was Odafe Owe. You see, understand, or I understand that Hollywood Brown wanted out. He had asked for a trade at least twice. But having only completed 3 seasons, there was no reason that the Baltimore Ravens had to trade him, especially when you have a young quarterback who needed weapons. You understand? He needed weapons. So you trade away a 91 catch, 1,000-yard receiver so that you could get a developmental edge rusher. That makes no sense. And then here he is landing with the Kansas City Chiefs back to compete against the Baltimore Ravens, just like every other player we've allowed to walk out of the door. Granted, with Brown and Brown, Brown and Brown, Hollywood Brown and Orlando Brown, yeah, we got first round picks, and I believe Tyler Lindenbaum is gonna be a stud and already is a stud. But the question is, why do the Baltimore Ravens allow proven talent to go away and have to consistently press reset on potential and promise? You see, when we look at our ability to compete, the saying around Baltimore is that as long as we got Lamar Jackson, we have a chance. That's true. But what if we were consistent with being able to retain proven talent? How much more of a chance would the Baltimore Ravens have? In part three, I'm going to show you um, not really a redraft, but a conversation about if decisions had been made differently, what the Baltimore Ravens would have looked like, and then what we would have looked like or showed up as in this past AFC Championship, and how much better and improved this team would be. I'm Miguel Boulanger. This is the GM, and I'm out.